What is happening, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another episode of Oddity Acres. We are headed to the Akron-Canton area of Ohio, more specifically Cuyahoga Falls, where a very particular serial killer was born and raised, Robert Berdella Jr. Now, Robert was better known as the Kansas City Butcher. He was born and raised in Cuyahoga Falls, going to Cuyahoga Falls High School. Robert was kind of shy, his brother was more of the athletic type, and his dad put a lot of emphasis on sports. This kind of made Robert a little bit more of an outcast, but he had a typically normal childhood. After graduating high school, he moved to Kansas City, where he went to the Kansas City Arts Institute. At the Kansas City Art Institute, he kind of made a name for himself during an art project where he was accused of killing a live duck. That later led to him dropping out of school, but he did get a job at a restaurant, and then recently after that, a local bazaar, where he worked a booth there and bought a house for himself in the Kansas City area. Shortly after that, Robert would go on to kill 6 men in the Kansas City area. Today we're going to stop at a couple locations that were important to his childhood, including the school, and we're also going to stop at the graveyard where he's buried with his father. Join us in our new true crime segment as we explore the life of Robert Berdella Jr. Stay tuned. In 1965, Berdella saw the film The Collector. The plot of this movie revolves around a man who stalks and abducts a young woman he finds attractive and holds her captive. After several weeks, the woman dies of a contracted illness despite her captor's best efforts to keep her alive. Berdella later stated that this movie formed a lasting impression on him.
Time magazine calls him one of the most cunning, evil characters of modern fiction. From dream to nightmare.
How long are you going to keep me here?
I don't know. It depends.
So right behind me is the Cuyahoga Falls High School. In the summer of 1967, this is where Robert Berdella graduated from. Shortly after graduating this high school is when he moved to Kansas City and began his murderous acts. After dropping out of the institute, he began spending much of his free time with male prostitutes, drug addicts, petty criminals, and runaways around the Kansas City area. That's when, in 1982, Berdella began renting his own booth at the Westport Flea Market. There, he became acquainted with a fellow merchant named Paul Howe, who operated a booth adjacent to his own. Soon, Berdella became acquainted with Paul Howe's younger son, Jerry. That would be his first victim. Berdella is believed to have killed Jerry on July 5, 1984, who he abducted on the promise of driving the youth to attend a dancing contest. According to Berdella, he gave Hal alcohol, Valium, and other drugs both in his car and at his house until the youth became unconscious. He then injected Hal with a heavy tranquilizer before subjecting him to torture until he was no longer alive. On April 10, 1985, a former roommate of Berdella's, 20-year-old Robert Shelton, arrived at his doorstep asking if he could again stay at his house. Berdella again drugged the man and administered the torture he had previously, until ultimately killing him. The following June, Berdella found Mark Wallace, whom he vaguely knew, hiding in his shed taking shelter from a thunderstorm. Berdella invited him inside his house and injected him with drugs, again claiming another victim. On September 26, 1985, Berdella met with an acquaintance, James Ferris, at a local bar, brought him home, drugged him with crushed tranquilizers he had concealed in a meal, then tied him to his bed before torturing him almost constantly for 27 hours before his death. On June 17, 1986, 23-year-old drug addict and sometimes prostitute Todd Stoops took Berdella's invite to come over to purchase drugs. Berdella had held him captured for 2 weeks before his passing due to his weakened state. In the spring of 1987, Berdella became friendly with a 20-year-old named Larry Wayne Pearson, who lived with him for a short period of time. Berdella drugged him and performed various experiments on him. After 6 weeks of captivity, Pearson fought back, but to no avail. Berdella strangled him, then decapitated him before burying his head in the backyard. At 1 a.m. on March 29, 1988, Berdella abducted his last victim, a 22-year-old male prostitute named Christopher Bryson, whom he lured to his house with the promise of payment for sex. At Berdella's home, Bryson was knocked unconscious with an iron bar, then bound to Berdella's bed, where he was subjected to similar methods of abuse and torture endured by previous victims. By the third day of his capture, Bryson was able to escape by burning through his restraints with a book of matches and alert the authorities, who later arrested Berdella. Upon investigation on the home, police found human remains, skulls, teeth kept in envelopes, syringes, torture devices, ropes and restraints, and other various evidence tying him to the murders. Berdella will be found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of second-degree murder, selling amphetamines, sodomy, assault, and sexual assault. Berdella was sentenced with life imprisonment without parole.
The inmates down there are waiting to get their hands on me. I am at this point less concerned about the inmates acting on their own as opposed to the inmates or an inmate acting in response to maybe some directive or coercion from some police officers.
Do you think you're being set up, perhaps?
Well, I think the Star and Times have, since they haven't been able to get a court to put me to death, are now trying to get the inmates to do it for them.
On October 8, 1992, at 2 p.m., Berdella was complaining about some heart problems, was taken to a local hospital in Missouri. He was pronounced dead when he got there. After he passed, they cremated him, and he is now buried with his father at this gravesite. It is very strange to be standing so close to where the last resting place of a prolific serial killer is. It feels weird to be standing so close to evil, It's incredible. And go figure, Ohio, the birthplace of serial killers, apparently, because I feel like any serial killer story, be a Dahmer, be, all these crazy things, they always come back to Ohio somehow. And it is very, very, very crazy.
In this house, in a quiet residential neighborhood, a series of brutally violent, horrible crimes have been committed.
Just a bunch of earth is all that's left of 4315 Charlotte, but some people will never forget the house nor the man who lived here. Bob Berdella, Kansas City's most infamous serial killer, is dead. He died in prison after his victims were killed in his home. Berdella confessed to sexually and physically torturing 6 men here. But some believe there were more victims and hope digging up the house might unearth some secrets.